Well, it's a pleasure to speak with Sherri Goodman, a seasoned policy expert and senior figure at the Wilson Center's Polar Institute and Environmental Change and Security Program. She is the author of the recently published book, Threat Multiplier: Climate, Military Leadership, and the Fight for Global Security. So, welcome, Ms. Goodman.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
The Arctic is rapidly transforming due to climate change, geopolitical competition, and increasing interest in resource extraction. As ice melts, nations grapple with the balance between economic opportunities and environmental risks. The region's future is not just a concern for Arctic states, but has global implications affecting climate systems, security, and economies worldwide. Against this backdrop, I will ask you questions that will delve into the intersections of climate security, resource competition, geopolitics, and international cooperation in the Arctic. My first question centers on what can be called the Arctic dilemma, the relentless tug of war between resource extraction and environmental protection. How do you see this battle unfolding, especially in light of your book, Threat Multiplier? Sherry?
Well, thank you very much for that question. I mean, this is an important conundrum we face in Arctic security. If we think of security as including both protection of global security and also climate and environmental security, the fact that the Arctic is melting 4 times faster, or the temperatures are rising 4 times faster than the global average, and that sea ice is retreating and permafrost is thawing and collapsing, has led to circumstances that actually allow for greater potential resource extraction in the region. Now, there has been resource extraction for some time now. I mean, Russia has been extracting energy at Yamal with the aid of investment, and there has been other resource extraction, but we're on the cusp of potentially a whole new generation of extracting energy, minerals, potentially deep seabed mining, and in the future, fish. So, I mean, it's a real tension. Obviously, it's a tension that has been faced around the globe for centuries. How to preserve natural resources and then also extract enough of those resources productively to support a prosperous society. In the fragile Arctic region, a region whose ecosystem is rapidly changing in part due to climate change and increased human access, I think the challenge is probably one of the greatest we've ever faced in that region, and it comes on top of the change in geopolitics in the region, which throughout the Cold War. Surprisingly, the Arctic was a zone characterized often by cooperation, and cooperation manifested in many ways through the Arctic Council, the group of Arctic nations and many observers who came together to address non-security issues in the Arctic, such as marine resources, and education and transportation. And now this region has become one of much greater competition, partly because of Russia's aggression in the region, and partly because, as you say, there is much more access to the resources of the region.
And you're quite right about how geopolitics is now determining a lot of the changes in the Arctic. You cannot take politics out of climate change, and climate change cannot be taken out of politics. So these two go quite hand in hand, and we see this being played out in every part of the world. So I also sense that while this changing dynamic, especially with President Trump coming into power, there is a new found fondness between Trump and Putin, and one cannot totally ignore the two countries' strategic rivalry impacting the Arctic. Additionally, what we are also seeing is broader implications for other countries like India, for example, which are observing these developments from a certain distance, but could still face ripple effects from the shifting geopolitical and environmental landscape. Some thoughts from you, Sherry, on this changing, this unpredictable politics that is happening with Trump coming in?
Well, let me start with what we often say about the Arctic is what happens in the Arctic doesn't stay in the Arctic.
That's right.
And that's by way of saying that let's start first with the environmental changes in the Arctic can lead to changing weather and atmospheric and climate patterns around the world. And we see that, for example, in the United States, we see that we now have um, a polar vortex that comes down and sort of makes part of the lower 48 sometimes colder in the winter as a result of Arctic air dipping further south. But we also see that it can affect potentially the monsoon seasons in India. Um, so, and as a result of the geopolitics now, the changing relationships between the United States and Russia under Trump and Putin, um, at the present time, it looks like those two leaders would like to sort of carve out spheres of influence um, in their own regions. And if you apply that logic to the Arctic, um, you could see, more of a Western Hemisphere Arctic and a Euro-Russian, Russian or a Russian Arctic. Of course, Russia has the largest Arctic coastline. Putin has been trying to monetize the Northern Sea Route into a toll road for transportation from ports in Asia to ports in Europe. He sees that as a source of economic revenue in the future. And I mean, he has some in the present, but he'd like to monetize it further into the future. And so we could be entering an era more like we saw centuries ago, where powers seek to sort of act on based on their acquiring their resources and managing within spheres of influence. I don't know for sure that we're there yet, but we do see some signs that instead of working in the way countries have since the end of World War II in terms of creating global institutions that aim to raise the prosperity and promise of many around the world in many ways, more of a hemispheric approach.
Yes, you're quite right. What happens in the Arctic does not stay there, but what is happening elsewhere in the world is also impacting the Arctic. So the Arctic's exceptionalism, which held for long, has in some sense quite broken. My next few questions, three to be precise, is more related to climate security and the changing climate in the Arctic, especially with the permafrost releasing massive methane stores. Are we underestimating the speed and scale of climate catastrophe? What immediate action do you think can help prevent a global chain reaction?
Well, that's such a good question. I do think, let me break that down a little bit. I think we are likely underestimating um, methane releases from permafrost in the Arctic.
Yes.
So, we have had pledges throughout the climate conferences in recent years to reduce methane primarily from oil and gas operations. That has not addressed the methane from permafrost. And we know now that with increasing permafrost thaw and melt, that there is more methane release. I've been part of some projects with the Wilson Center, with Harvard University, and with some of our other national labs, better to understand and measure and monitor those sources of methane releases. So I think that global carbon budgets likely don't fully account for those methane releases. And as you and your listeners probably know, methane is one of the most potent greenhouse gases. So I do think that is going to be a serious source of concern. It is already a source of concern. The question is, how do we better manage for that in an era where we likely have less cooperation on reducing global greenhouse gas emissions?
Indeed, I think climate security isn't just an Arctic issue. I think it is largely a global one now. And you have often stressed in your writings on the importance of climate security. Now, how can international partnership, and I think we need to look at partnerships now, including those involving India, be strengthened to enhance climate resilience in the Arctic? You know that India is an observer status in the Arctic Council, and there are certain roles that India can play. Do you visualize a certain a role that India can, collaborative research, for example, data sharing? All these can help improve our understanding of the interconnected climate systems affecting both the Arctic and the Indian subcontinent, particularly the Himalayas.
Yes, I think that's very important, and thank you for mentioning the Himalayas and the melting of the glaciers in that region, and in South America. So we have other regions of the world besides the Arctic and the Antarctic that are important sources of glaciers and are suffering as a result of rising temperatures and climate change. So I do, India, of course, has great scientific and technological capability. You've been an observer in the Arctic Council. You are, marshaling your scientific, academic, and technological expertise better to understand it, both, of course, for your own national interest, to understand how it's going to affect the monsoon, the agricultural um, sector in your country, but also in the region. So I think there are prospects for growing partnerships, scientific. I would probably start with scientific engagements. I mean, traditionally, science cooperation has been a global enterprise. And, despite the changes at the sort of climate diplomatic level, that doesn't preclude continuing collaboration, among scientists globally better to understand um, changes in the Arctic, from permafrost thaw to ocean circulation, to various other capabilities. We need to have a robust Arctic scientific monitoring and measuring system so that we can better understand and manage the changes we're heading towards.
Yeah. Thank you for that thought. I think my final question would really be resembling the first question that I asked, and that's to say that resource extraction will remain a reality, especially as the Arctic opens up. It is too much of a temptation not to really extract the resources there. Uh, but we can find globally, I think, with partnerships and collaboration and cooperation, we can find a way forward to ensure responsible and sustainable resource management in the Arctic. Do you think that is the path that countries can take? But they need to, of course, sit together, think together, and work together on this. International governance frameworks need to be developed to overcome this dilemma that we talked about in the very first question that I asked you.
Yes, exactly. I mean, I think, through the Arctic Council and its many working groups, we have been on a path to do that. And much of that is done in scientific and technical committees, things like how to do sustainable mining, how to manage fish stocks, how to improve communications and education, how to improve monitoring of methane releases or other parameters. So I think that can continue, and it should continue. It should continue both under the auspices as appropriate in the Arctic Council. It can also, the U.S. and India have long had a very robust climate and clean energy and scientific engagement that has even deepened and strengthened over recent years. And I think this could be also an area of continuing opportunity among our two nations. And potentially with
Well,
others in the region, other
yes,
organizations.
absolutely. I think so. Thank you very much, Sherry Goodman, for this wonderful interaction and having listened to your thoughts and comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I hope it's a good conference.